Good morning, everybody. Thank you for braving the weather this morning and coming out on a sleepy Sunday morning to talk about file management. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is not the most exciting or sexy topic, but I think as we all would agree, it is one of the things that can trip up digital photographers more than anything else. Just a quick show of hands, how many of you have ever had trouble finding a certain file when you were looking for a photo? Pretty much everybody. As your photo archive grows and grows, the issue of managing those image files becomes more and more important. So what we're going to talk about today are some fundamental aspects of organizing your photo archives, and by this I mean your files and folders on hard drive. And we'll talk about how Lightroom helps you with this and how it all fits in with the ecosystem, as it were. First, I want to just clarify that what we're talking about this morning is Lightroom Classic CC. Okay? And this has been a new development where the Lightroom product line has split into two branches. So I want to make sure that we're all clear on what is Lightroom Classic CC. If you've been using Lightroom for any amount of time, or since the beginning, as it came out over 11 years ago, Lightroom Classic is what we've always known as Lightroom. Okay, and they've just rebranded it because the new program called just Lightroom CC is the cloud-based system, which is a completely separate application. Okay, so again, the important thing is this is Lightroom as you've always known Lightroom. It just has a bit of a different name. So Lightroom Classic, as it has always been, is mainly designed around working with your pictures on hard drives, local disks, files and folders. Right? Just the same way that you would manage any of your other types of files on your computer. I'm sure if you're capturing digitally, then you are well aware that when you capture files on your camera and transfer them to the computer, you're working with a bunch of files. So that's why we call it file management, okay? Because these are image files. I'm going to start by just going over a couple of quick fundamentals here. And I want to preface this by saying that I'm well aware that a lot of this stuff comes down to personal preference and opinions of the best way to do things. But what I'm going to try and lay out here are some key principles so that you can devise a file storage system that will serve you well into the future. The important thing is that you take control of your image file management and plan for it to grow and expand. And one of the most simple ways to do this is by using external hard drives. Many of my clients and students work initially starting with a laptop and downloading their pictures into the laptop on the internal hard drive. This is okay for sort of a temporary storage solution, but I'm here to tell you that in the long run, you're going to be best served by storing your image archives on some kind of external device, whether it's a RAID, a redundant array of disks, or it's a single hard drive. I currently am using a single 3 terabyte hard drive as my master working drive. So what you see here on the screen is a basic setup that is easy to implement, pretty inexpensive, and it's built around the idea of using 3 identical hard drives. So you have one hard drive that's your master working drive. That's where all your files are kept while you're working on them. You have a second hard drive that's your backup, which you're updating kind of every time that you do any editing. And then you have a third drive that we would call the archive, which is updated not as often, but it can be kept off-site, right? So you could keep it at a neighbor's house or in a safe deposit box at a bank or wherever, just to keep your files safe, right? So whenever I'm buying hard drives, I buy 3 of them. And with the price of hard drives coming down as it is, I mean, you can get a terabyte drive for 50 pounds, 2 terabytes for 70 or 80 pounds, you know, so it's not a huge investment. But when you buy 3, the advantage is that you can mirror these one to the other, and you have 3 identical copies. At the very minimum, you want to always have at least 2 copies of all of your files, okay? And using external drives is one of the ways to make it easier to manage your backups and keeping everything separate from your computer internal system drive. Consider that on any computer, you've got your main system drive that's got the operating system and your applications and maybe some other documents. Your photo library deserves to have a place of its own. So I recommend using external drives. just to clarify a little further, the idea of backup and archival, you want to maintain a working backup, which means every time you make changes to a lot of photos, or even one photo, you want to update your backup so that you've got redundancy, okay? And redundancy in the good way, I mean. The archival then would be just in case of emergency, right? But it's always good to keep that, in worst case scenario. Now, cloud backup is something that is being talked about more and more, and this is, again, where the new Lightroom CC has been developed to address the issue of cloud storage. Now, it's not realistic for most photographers to take 100,000 images or 500,000 photos and upload them into the cloud. We're just not at that point. So for a lot of photographers, Lightroom Classic with the hard drive-based file system is still the bread and butter, right? This is still where we're living. However, cloud storage is evolving very quickly, and bandwidth is getting faster and faster, and it is reasonable now that you could upload, a sizable portion of your archives, maybe your best pictures or your favorite selections, or working files as you go on trips and so forth. So start thinking about incorporating cloud storage or backups into your workflow as time goes on. Now, as your archive grows and grows, as you're taking more and more pictures, the advantage of using something like Lightroom becomes, more significant. Finding photos should be a lot more or simpler and more direct than digging through files and folders in your file system. And whether you're using Mac or Windows, Lightroom has been designed to address that solution. The way that you organize your files and folders on the hard drive is still important, though, okay? And now, considering that we're still talking about traditional hard disk storage, you want to organize your files in a logical way. And this is one of the places where it can vary a lot from person to person in terms of their preferences. Now, I've worked with a lot of different photographers over the years using a lot of different types of systems, and I'll just show you a couple of quick examples here. So let me hide this out of the way. So one solution, and actually where I started back in the early 2000s as I was starting to do lots more digital capture, is using a folder structure based on location, right? So I'd have a folder called Europe, and then in Europe you have Italy, then Tuscany, and gradually you're going down and down, right? Okay, so that's a location-based system, which I felt like was serving me okay at the time, but as my archives started growing, it became very unwieldy, right? Because certain folders became difficult to know, which to put it in, and the contents of individual folders were always changing, so backups become a little bit more problematic. So another way that people, especially professional photographers shooting for clients, might organize photos is, named for the client. So you'd have client 1 and then different shoots organized under each client. But I think for most photographers, especially people mainly doing personal work or personal projects, your best bet for organizing your photos is going to be by date. Now, one of the main reasons for this is that it's a system that you can use all the time, the same way, regardless of where the pictures were taken, what it's a photo of, who it's for, and any of those criteria that's based on the content of the picture is separate from the date that it was made. Right? If you think back to the old days of shooting on, strips of or rolls of slide film or any kind of negatives where you have the date and they're processed that date and everything's all kind of together. If you organize your digital captures by date and put everything from a given shoot into one folder, your life becomes much, much easier. Now, whether or not you break this down into day by day or month by month, that's up to you. But I think if you start by first organizing by the year and then break it down from there. So I may have, in 2007, these are just some examples. I've got a folder called Denver Skyline, and again, I put the date on it. So it's within 2007, but now I've addressed the location of it. So I can quickly look in the file system and see where it was made and what they're photos of. So you can name the folders for what the pictures are of, but at the top level, the structure is based on date. The advantage of this, there are actually several advantages. One is that as your archive grows and grows, you know that as a year finishes, that you're not going to be adding any more new photos to that folder. right? So your backups become a lot easier. Now, if you go back and edit those pictures, from any time during that calendar year, of course, you would need to update those backups. But the contents of that folder are not always expanding and expanding, right? So you could get to a certain point where you'd say, this year is done, and I'm starting the next year. It makes keeping your backups easier, okay? So again, the idea is a chronological folder structure. Now, the way that you name your folders and files is equally as important, because you're not always going to be looking at things in Lightroom. And if you're looking at your images on the desktop, you need to be able to quickly look at it and identify what it is. Now, you might not always remember when a photo was taken, but if I start digging down into these folders, then I can quickly get more information about locations and shooting sessions, if you were. Okay, so start thinking in terms of a top-level parent folder that has everything. In this case, it's just called sorry, bear with me here. In this case, it's just called sample folder structures, but I've got a top-level folder, and then underneath are multiple subfolders, and basing it on a year, okay? Now, the way that you name your image files is equally as important. You see a file name example here, where I put my name and the location and a date and a serial number, and we'll look at this a little bit more in Lightroom. So naming the actual image files is important as well. We probably don't have enough time this morning to get too much into file formats, but here's a quick overview that you want to start thinking in terms of master files, which could also be your working files, and then derivative files. Your master files are your originals, essentially, the ones that were shot on the camera, okay? Your original negatives, if you were. As you work on your pictures, depending on your workflow, you might generate additional files. Like if you start in RAW and then make a Photoshop PSD or a TIFF file for layers to work in Photoshop, that's a second file. That would be a derivative of your original. As you get further in your workflow, at the very end of your workflow, you'll have derivative files that are used for specific purposes. And these are JPEGs that you've uploaded to Facebook or Instagram, or files that you've sent off to a lab for printing. Those are your derivative files. Now, you may not even need to retain those derivative files. In my case, usually, if I'm generating a derivative JPEG, let's say, it's for a very specific purpose. And after I make it and send it off to where it's going, I don't even keep it anymore. I just put it in the bin and get rid of it. So if I ever need to make different variations of an image file, then I just go back to my master in Lightroom and then spin off multiple derivatives as necessary. The idea here is that you want to have as few files as possible. If you've taken a single image capture, you don't want to have like 3 different variations and copies of that in different folders and different hard drives, right? You want to have it as simple as possible. So try and keep the number of files that you actually use to a minimum. So key takeaways from this point are to try and use external drives whenever possible. Try and keep 3 identical copies of backups. And try and develop your own organizational system that you can use all the time, regardless of what the pictures are from. Okay, so we'll go into Lightroom now and look at how Lightroom addresses this workflow. So once you've gone out and done a shooting session and you have a memory card filled with pictures, I've got an SD card here that I just made some quick photos around the house to demonstrate. The first step in Lightroom is always to do an import. Now, Lightroom's import process is going to be different depending on whether the pictures are coming from a memory card or a camera, or whether they are already copied on the hard drive. So your 2 basic choices at the beginning of the Lightroom file management workflow are you going to use Lightroom to copy the files off of the card, or are you going to copy them manually and then just add them to Lightroom? It's really crucial to always understand that whenever you do an import to Lightroom, the files are not actually stored inside Lightroom. They're on your hard drive in the files and folders, like what we just looked at. Lightroom is reading these pictures by reference. And so as you do an import, Lightroom always needs to maintain that link to the original file on the disk. So where you put the file becomes more important earlier in the process, because you don't want to have to be moving files around and trying to remember where you left something. Once you copy a file into its home on the hard drive, you should try and put it in the place where you want it to live kind of forever, right? And when you import it into Lightroom, ideally, you won't have to be moving things around too much. That being said, after you've imported something into Lightroom, if you do need to move it or rename it, put it in another folder, any of these operations, do it from within Lightroom. And then you won't break any of the links that Lightroom has with those files on disk. I'll show you some examples of that. So back to the import. I've got my memory card put into the computer, and then when I click the import button at the bottom left here, it brings up the import window. By default, if Lightroom finds a memory card or a camera connected, it's going to load those pictures. It's going to assume that this is what we're going to be importing. Well, the important thing about this is that if it's on removable media of any kind, Lightroom's going to copy the files. Okay, you can't really import the pictures into a Lightroom catalog and keeping them on this removable media, with maybe a few exceptions. But let's just understand and agree that when it's on a camera memory card, you want to be copying those files onto a hard drive. Whether it's on your internal laptop drive or an external drive, you're getting them off of the memory card onto a hard drive storage. So at the top middle here, you'll see that it's selected the import method, which is copy, right? At the top left, it shows the source. This is where the photos are coming from, and you can see that Lightroom has automatically selected the memory card. All of the photos on the card are selected. Okay, there's a little checkbox next to all of them, which means that if I click import, all of these pictures will be imported. I would recommend that in almost all cases, that if you're importing something to Lightroom, you just go ahead and import everything. If you need to remove something later, or there's anything you really don't want to keep, do it afterwards, because you'll get into all kinds of trouble starting to go through and selectively deciding which ones to import. One of the key tenets of using Lightroom effectively is when you open Lightroom, you want to be able to see all of your photos that are on the hard drive. You don't want Lightroom just to have some of your pictures in it. Now, Lightroom is capable of managing catalogs literally up to millions of pictures. So you don't have to worry about how many pictures are in your Lightroom catalog, provided that your computer has the performance really to deal with a larger catalog. Now, that is a separate issue. But the idea here is that when we open Lightroom, we can see all of our photos on our drive media. So I would be copying everything from the disk, and then if there's any that I want to delete, from the flash card, if there's anything I want to delete, then I'll do that later. Now, if you're using Lightroom to do your import and have it copy onto your hard drive, the most important setting in this whole screen is the destination over here. And unfortunately, a lot of photographers get tripped up on this. When you put your memory card in, Lightroom says, okay, I'm ready to import. You click the import button without looking around this screen, and Lightroom will choose for you where these pictures are going. Now, in this case, you can see by default, it's going to just put it in my pictures folder on my internal hard drive on my laptop. That's not really where I want to store them, right? Because I'm using an external drive. Okay? Now, even if I'm traveling and using my laptop, and even if I have external drives, I am not ever going to let Lightroom choose where to put the pictures for me, right? I want to take a little bit more control, especially at this stage. The biggest problem people face is letting Lightroom choose where the pictures are placed and how the folders are named, and then not knowing what those are, and then later going to try and find them. And Lightroom has created a system for you that you're unaware of. So the most important thing is to go to this destination panel and select the parent folder that you would put it in. Now, in this example, maybe I'll put them in the desktop, and I will make a new folder by clicking up here at the top into subfolder, and I'll just say test images. Okay, so I've given it a name, and actually, I should be consistent here and say 2018-03-18. Okay, that's how I would name the folder. So I've got the date and what the pictures are, right? So if I click import now, then Lightroom will start copying all these pictures into that folder, and it will also add them to the catalog. Now, I'm not going to import these because it'll take too long to copy. I'll do another type of import that will continue demonstrating this. But I want you to keep in mind that if you're using Lightroom to copy the files at any time, make sure to very carefully choose your destination over here. Now, another important point here is that if any point you change your mind or want to do something different, maybe you want to make a new folder yourself on your hard drive and then import directly to that, you can always cancel out of this import window and Lightroom will do nothing. And actually, that's a good way to get familiar with the contents of the import window and to learn your way around what the settings are and to have a play with it and see how Lightroom is treating things, and then just hit cancel and you don't do anything. The other method of importing pictures is based on you manually copying the files first. Okay, so the way this would work, if I hide out of Lightroom, I've got my memory card here on the desktop, and if I open it up, now this would be the same even if you're on Windows, you can drill down into your memory card. Here's all the pictures on the card, right? So what I could do instead of letting Lightroom copy is just make a new folder here. Okay, and I'll just grab a few of these. You don't have to do them all. But I would normally copy them all. And just drag and drop to copy them over. Okay, so I'm letting my Mac operating system do the copy. And then instead of having Lightroom do the copy, if I go into Import, then instead of choosing the memory card, instead I would go to Desktop. You can choose a different source. You can choose whether or not subfolders are included in the view. But in this case, if I just click on Test Images, there are all the pictures that I just imported. Now, you can see that Lightroom, rather than copying the pictures, has now defaulted to the Add method. From doing a lot of imports over the years with a lot of different students and clients and in my own work, I'm finding that if you get really comfortable and get a routine using this Add method of import, your life becomes so much easier. Again, a key principle of an efficient workflow is that you want to start creating systems that you can do the same way kind of every time. You don't want to have different scenarios and different ways of doing things, because that's where things go wrong, right? It's really easy to make a mistake, and then you make a big mess of all the files, and it's hard to clean up afterwards. So in this case, the files are already on the hard drive. I copied them over myself. Now I'm just going to use this method called add, which literally does not move, copy, rename, doesn't process the files at all. What it does is just add them to the Lightroom catalog. And by doing so, again, the pictures are not actually stored in the catalog. The pictures are still just right here in this folder that I made and copied, but now Lightroom can work with them. Okay, this is a key part of working with Lightroom, that you have to do an import in order for Lightroom to work with them. And this is because Lightroom is creating this relational link with the file on the hard drive. And then as you work in Lightroom, everything is done by reference to that file. Okay, it's just reading the file and generating previews as you go along. The original file on the hard drive is never going to be modified. Okay, everything that you do in Lightroom is stored in the catalog, and your edits are all done using metadata. Okay, but the folder or the image on disk is never modified. So after the import has been completed, then what I have here is a folder shown in the folders panel. Now this folders panel is also a key area of Lightroom to get really comfortable with. And a principle that I need you to understand at this point is that if something appears in this folders panel, that means Lightroom has imported it. Lightroom knows about these files. What you don't want to do is go out here into your file system and start changing things. Like if I rename this folder, what do you think Lightroom is going to do to that? Right? Now Lightroom says, give it a second just to update. Now Lightroom is saying all these photos are missing. We know they're not missing. They're still right there on the hard drive, but Lightroom has lost them because this link has been broken. When you do an import, Lightroom keeps records of where it is, what it's called. All of the files are stored in this database. So if it's changed outside Lightroom, Lightroom doesn't know what to do with it. Now, if you come into your folders panel and see a whole bunch of question marks and missing folders, there's a couple of things you can do. Number one, if you know you've deleted the files and you don't care about them and you're happy just to get rid of them, just remove them, remove the folder. If I press Control-click or right-click, you see I can remove the folder. If I remove it from Lightroom, it'll just forget all about it, and it's like it never happened. Okay, but if you do want to keep them, and you know what you've done with them, like I know that I renamed this file, or this folder, all I have to do is Control-click or right-click and choose Find Missing Folder. And now I have to navigate my way out to the desktop, and here it is, just with the number 2 at the end. If I click Choose, then Lightroom updates all the links. You can see the name has been updated, now everything's fine, right? The same thing applies to files. If I go out here and move half of these files into the bin manually, okay, let's say I decide, oh, I don't like those, I want to get rid of them, go back into Lightroom and give it just a second, and just like with the missing folder, all of a sudden now all these pictures are showing as missing. Okay, and it's because I had imported them at one point, but now they're not where they were, and so Lightroom is telling me that they're missing. And at this point, you can't do much with the pictures. You can't develop them or export them, so you need to either relink them or remove them in order to carry on. Now, if I had mistakenly put these in the bin, I can just put them back where they were, and Lightroom, given a second or two, it'll figure it out, right? But the idea here is that once you've imported things into Lightroom, if you need to move anything or change anything or even delete things, do it from within Lightroom, because Lightroom does have a direct link to your file system. It's just that the reverse is not true, okay? So if I want to rename this folder back to just test images, I can right-click on it, click Rename, and just take off that 2. Click Save, and now we go back and look on the desktop, and sure enough, it's been renamed. So Lightroom can do all these things for you, but if you do it outside of Lightroom, it gets very confused. So if you go back home and you find that your Lightroom catalog has a bunch of question marks or files and folders missing, first start deciding, A, do I need these? And B, can I find them? And if you know where they are and you can find them, then try and get everything relinked. Ultimately, you want to get to a place where you go under this library menu and choose Find All Missing Photos, and it says there are no missing photos. My master photo library has over 130,000 pictures in it, and I have no missing photos. It takes some ongoing effort, right? I mean, it's not an easy thing, especially as your library grows and grows, but it can be done, okay? So we've done the import, we've moved and renamed some things using the folders panel. One of the other main thing that you would want to incorporate into your workflow is to move beyond the folders panel and start working with collections. One of the real advantages of working with Lightroom as a database is that you can create different organizational structures that are separate from what's on the hard drive. So the way this works is, I've just imported these pictures, and let's say that I choose, I'm just going to assign some stars to these, and this is all very random. Again, these are just pictures I quickly snapped just to show some files. Okay, so I've given all these 1 star, and now I can filter it down, filter my view down to just show 1 star. Okay, now all of the other pictures that I didn't choose or didn't give a star to, they're still on the hard drive, they're still in the catalog, I've just hidden them. Okay, this is one of the benefits of using a database. If I now select all these pictures using Command A or Control A, select all, and choose Create Collection, okay, again, I'm in the Library module here, and I'll just call it Demo Collection. You would want to give it a better name than that. Always try and name things very clearly for what it is or what it's for. And down here, I'll choose Include Selected Photos. Okay? One other thing I want to point out now is that if this catalog is being synchronized with Lightroom CC, okay, now remember at the beginning I said Lightroom CC is a whole separate kind of ecosystem that includes cloud storage. If this catalog is synced with my cloud storage, then there's a button here also to sync with Lightroom CC on the cloud. So you can actually use Lightroom Classic to synchronize collections of photos up to your Adobe Cloud. Okay, so that's one way to link together the two types of Lightroom. Okay, you can only sync with one catalog, and I'm syncing with my account is synced with my catalog at home. That's why I didn't turn it on for this one. So spend some time researching a little bit about this new Lightroom CC and the cloud storage architecture, because sometimes if you make collections for different purposes, it's really handy to have them out in the cloud where you can access them from everywhere. Sorry for the little bit of a tangent there, but I wanted to make sure you're clear on that. So back to creating a collection. All I've done was selected the pictures, given it a new name. I'll say include selected photos, click create, and now I have a collection. I am now viewing the photos from within the collection, and these can now be edited just as if they were real pictures, but these are actually just instances of the photos within the database, and so I can make different collections for any kind of purpose, right? So I've got collections for web galleries, work in progress, portfolios. So start using collections a lot more, because a single photo can be a member of any number of collections. So you're not having to duplicate your files all over the hard drive for different purposes. That's what collections are for.